Hello, this is Robert Plenick, the owner of Brutal Iron Gym. I'm here for a second video in the series of addressing weaknesses in the big lift, squat, bench, and deadlift. So in the first video we kind of talked about the general reasons for why somebody might be missing their big lift. And we kind of talked about the 3 points of technical, physical, and mental. So that will be the kind of the main reasons why. They're either having bad technique and they need to improve that, or they're pretty decent technique but they just need to get physically stronger, or they have good technique, they're strong enough, but mentally they're just kind of not set. So they're mentally just not into the lift, either lack of confidence or overhyped. There's a couple different reasons, but those are kind of the three main reasons why they might be missing their main lift. So this video specifically is to talk about the squat. So again, the purpose of this video is more so to just kind of point out what there is and some general concepts. So this isn't going to have, probably all the details, all the answers you want, but it's going to start to get you what to think of to find those answers. So that's the intent of this video. So the technical stuff that we kind of look for in a squat, I kind of went through and just kind of listed some of the things that I would think of myself, is upper back tightness and lat tightness. So very often you'll see people, they'll get to the bottom of the lift, and as soon as they go to come up, their upper back kind of rounds over. And one of the reasons could be just poor posturing, kind of bad tightness or lack of tightness in their upper body. So generally what you want to have is you want to be grabbing onto the bar, and as you go under the bar, you want to actually not pull on the bar. You just want to kind of pretend like you're doing a lat pull down, kind of flex your lats down and back. And what that's going to do is it's going to tighten kind of your upper arms down to your body. And by flexing your lats, one of the cues I use is you can either have your hands on the bar and kind of push out into the bar. So like where you're trying to like pull the bar apart, and that'll actually flex your lats pretty good. And then you want to take your elbows and kind of pull them down towards your hips. So what you're looking to try to do is not only flex your lat up under your armpit, but you're trying to flex your lat all the way down your torso. And what that does is that prevents that upper mid-back from rounding over. So the lats are a big component for that. The other part is just making sure your traps are tightened in. So it's kind of generally just your whole upper back should be really flexed and tight. So often what I'll see is clients, they'll have their hands on the bar, and they're kind of like, they kind of like are pulling down the bar, which I don't like that cue. So you should not really be pulling down. So what that generally is going to cause is when you get a little bit of a forward lean and you hit the hole, if they're pulling down, they're actually going to be pulling themselves kind of forward or just pulling themselves out of position. So you should be braced into the bar and tight against the bar, but you shouldn't be kind of like really pulling it down on yourself. So that's one thing you want to kind of think of is, or what are you doing with your upper back? So in the physical parts here, what we're going to talk about is some lifts that would actually be able to address that. So if you think that this is a problem for you, technique-wise, we're going to talk about the lifts that might help you build up that technique. So another thing I kind of think of is head placement. So you'll hear people talk about you should have your head up or your head kind of neutral, and what they mean is your head in line with your spine. So I tend to be a believer, and I tend to teach people to have their head kind of in line with their body. So if their body has a little bit of a forward tilt, you'll see that they might be kind of looking a little slightly downward, but out in front of them. So what the idea of this is to try to teach them to keep a neutral spine, where from their hip to their kind of the top of their head is one straight line. So what you'll see is sometimes if a person lifts their head, their lower back will kind of curve, and they'll kind of have their butt lifted up, and that's going to throw off their hip placement, and they're going to have trouble hitting parallel. Or in order to hit parallel, they have to then like round their lower back out. So the weird term for that is called butt wink. It's a goofy, weird word, but that refers to as they come down, their hips are going to stop here, but in order to get to parallel, their hips are going to have to rotate. So that's what you're going to try to avoid doing. When you rotate your hips like that, you're exposing your lower back to a lot of potential injury. So, and that could simply just come from their head being up. So again, kind of think of what you're doing with your head. If you're not sure of what you're doing, pick something and go with that consistently. And then, like I said, you want to try a little bit of everything. So go ahead and try a neutral head position. So again, it's not going to be staring straight down at the floor, but if I'm leaning forward like this, my head is going to be kind of downward in line with my neck versus being up like that. So that's the idea, is we're going to have our head kind of in line with our spine. So if you film yourself and you watch, your lower back and your head and your neck and all that should be in one straight line. So next thing we have is kind of torso angle. So very often I'll see people, they'll unrack the squat, walk back to position, and they're holding themselves very upright. And then in order for them to start the lift, they have to push their butt back, and it almost like throws them forward. So what I tend to teach is actually when they unrack the bar and step back, they should already have kind of the torso angle set, so that they want to try to use without the lift, throughout the lift. Kind of the general thinking is, if I'm too extreme one way, then if as I start to squat it throws me to the extreme of that way, and then all of a sudden at the bottom I'm supposed to correct that extreme, it's going to be really hard. Whereas if you just kind of have to hold position, that's going to be a little bit easier to have, like kind of just generally like an isometric hold in that position, rather than kind of getting thrown out of position and having to try to find position again. So I tend to teach a little bit of a forward torso angle, to where like when they unrack the bar, from when they start their squat down and all the way up, their body angle should be consistent, rather than kind of kicking forward and then kicking back up. So that's one thing to think of. So another thing we have is foot width. So I'll have clients sometimes they'll be staying way too narrow, which is going to really kind of limit their hip motion. It's going to limit involvement of the hamstrings and glutes. It's going to make the squat mostly be quads and lower back. The alternative to that, at the other extreme, is they'll have their feet really wide, and they're going to have trouble hitting parallel, because it just throws all the weight into their hips, their adductors, their lower back. So it's kind of the other extreme. So generally how I teach people to kind of start with what foot position should they start with, and then kind of like tweak from there, is to have them stand with their feet directly underneath their hips. So in this video you can't see my feet, so I'm going to try to avoid actually doing it with my feet, because that won't help you. So you want to start with your feet underneath your hips. Then what you want to do is pick up your heel and take your heel as far out as you can. Then pick up your toes and take them out. And what you'll have is a little bit of a toe angle, so not quite, say, 45 degrees, but you do want to have your toes flared a little bit. So that's going to help with kind of reducing torque in the knee, which keeps them a little bit safer. It's going to help you involve your outer hip a little bit better, and keep kind of a general evenness in the usage in the muscles of the thigh, the upper leg. So, but again, it's kind of feet straight down from your hips. Pick your heels up, take them as far as you can. Pick your toes up, take them out. And then that's generally a pretty good position to start from. So that's going to give you a pretty decent, even involvement of your leg muscles. Like you'll have a decent even involvement of your quads, your hamstrings, your adductors, the inner leg, and the outer hips and the glutes, so the lower back. And then what you might find from there is you might be stronger in your quads, so all of a sudden you might take a little bit of a narrow position, or you might be stronger in your lower back and your hamstrings and glutes, your posterior chain, backside of you, and you might take a little bit of a wider position. But that general position is a good place to start from, and then you can kind of tweak it from there. So we have, I had trouble reading my own writing there, so movement sequence. So again, what this kind of refers to is when a person's in position to start their squat, do they bend their knees first, do they bend their hips first, kind of what goes first, what goes second as they kind of descend in the squat. So and that's going to be a matter of practicing. So we have a concept here that I'm going to give you a physical way of practicing that, but it's trying to learn is what joints move at what times to what degrees. So the movement pattern and what is the correct pattern for you and your build. So those are the kind of the technical aspects of a squat that you'd want to kind of be aware of. And if I mention something that you have no clue, like you didn't know of before, you want to go ahead and start kind of addressing that, thinking of that. If you do know, or you do think you're doing all these things correctly, great for you. But it's still always good to kind of double check and constantly keep readdressing these issues. So in my own powerlifting career, like I've been doing powerlifting for 3 years specifically, but I've been lifting for 16 years total. And I'll have, especially in the last 3 years, like something where like I thought my back was tight, but then all of a sudden I learned a new cue and I really addressed it. Then all of a sudden it was really tight, whereas before it actually wasn't. So sometimes you'll think you're doing something, But if you keep continuing to educate yourself and keep working on it, you might find that you're going to be able to improve that. So the idea is to never think it's perfect. So never stop addressing, never stop learning. So keep trying to fix these things even if you think you already have it fixed. So the physical lifts, or the physical kind of variations of a squat to address different components, are listed here. So I tried to keep the video simple, so I just addressed variations of a squat. So instead of talking about glute ham raise and hamstring curls and good mornings and when all that stuff would fit in, so we want to just simply address the actual variations of a squat. So if you feel like your quads are a weakness for you, and one of the ways this kind of shows up is as you drop down to the bottom of a squat, as you go to come up, your hips kind of get pushed back. So and that's your body changing your torso angle to more of this extreme. So it loads the lower back and makes the lower back do more of the work. So whereas if somebody's quads are stronger, they're going to be able to kind of keep their knees forward on the way up. And I don't mean their knees are going to go past their toes, but just the position they're in the very bottom, their knees shouldn't immediately shoot backward. They should just kind of like come up as one smooth unit. So that's the idea, is if your quads are weak, if you're seeing that in your squat, one way to address it is front squats. So you'd want to start doing those more often. And then another one is what's called high bar. This does assume that you know what low bar is, low bar and high bar. It has to do with the placement of the bar on your back. And what it does is it changes the torso angle, and it will cause most likely a change to your foot positioning. So people who do high bar tend to have a narrower stance, and that emphasizes the quads. Whereas when you do a low bar, you'll tend to have a little bit of a wider stance, and that emphasizes more the back side of the body, so the lower back, glutes, and hamstrings. So those are kind of two good variations. There's a lot more variations out there. I'm just more so wanting to highlight some common ones that I've used with myself and with clients. And then if you start from these, you can then find other things that might work for you. So for example, another good thing for quads is here at Birdland Gym we have a belt squat. So I'll throw in some belt squats. So and what that does, it allows me to really address my quads with no lower back involvement. So if I want to kind of work my quads but my lower back is tired or fatigued, or I have a big deadlift session coming up and I want to save some of the lower back, that's where a belt squat could come in place. But again, I want to try to stick to mostly main variations of squatting. So if we have weak hamstrings, a box squat is great for that. So you want to keep a vertical shin. So when you first start to squat back, your knees should not move. So your knees should stay kind of like set, and then you're going to pivot from your hips. So what that does, it causes a really good stretch in your hamstrings and glutes and lower back. So that's a really good way to address your hamstrings, is to start doing box squats. So a good way to address your lower back again is box squats or a low bar. So if you typically squat high bar with a narrow stance, then you can start to do low bar with a little bit of wider stance, and that'll help you build up your lower back. So upper back and posture, front squats help with this in a sense where they won't help you learn the technical cueing because you'll be in a different position to do a front squat, but they do place a high demand on the muscles of the upper back and the postural muscles. So that way you can get those muscles stronger, and then as you work on the technique and the cueing, you then have more strength to put into that position. So front squats work really well for that. And at Birdland Gym we have a bar called a safety squat bar, and that's another bar that works really well. Again, it places greater emphasis on the upper back and the posture. So if you need strength in the hole, so like when you get to parallel and you feel like you're going to die down there, so a good variation is paused variations. So you might do a pause squat where you pause at the hole, or you might come down and come up 2 or 3 inches to like kind of the sticking point that most people have, and create a pause there. So it'd be variations where you're just trying to spend more time under tension in your weakest spot. So you'll put pauses in the spots of your weakness. So that'll just get you more time under tension in that position, and that'll eventually over time build up your physical strength for that position. So another concept we have for building up in the hole is what's called slow concentric and eccentric. So what this means is on the way down the squat, you might take a 3 count or a 5 count and come all the way down going like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You'll hit the bottom, and then you come up real slow, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Again, the whole purpose of that is just more time under tension in that lower portion, and that's going to help you build strength down there. So the other concept that you come across is speed. So maybe somebody's physically strong, they have good technique, but they just move really slow. So a good thing to work on is speed. Again, there's a million and one techniques out there that people will say, but one that I know that works really well for myself and with clients is banded work. So sometimes you'll hear people say, like, should beginners use bands and chains? It's one of those things where if the person uses it and they get benefit, then who cares what anybody else should do? If you're getting benefit from it, then you should use it. So, and I have used bands and chains with beginners, and I have seen benefits. So, it's not like if you start doing bands and chains, you're going to abandon all regular lifting, and they're not going to work on a regular squat anymore. So, it's just simply another adaptation that you can use to kind of emphasize a weakness. So, with bands, what we tend to do is, if you look up the West Side method or the conjugate method, they use bands or dynamic effort work or speed work. So that's kind of the concept we're looking for here. So we're going to put about like the idea on the weight that you use is that it should be light enough that you can move it fast, but heavy enough that you have to move it fast. And what I mean by that is if it's too heavy, you're going to move like molasses. You're going to move really slow because it's just really burdening on the body, and you can't all of a sudden develop this speed. So again, the whole point of working on speed is to create speed. That means you're already slow. So if you have a really heavy weight, you're going to stay slow because that's what you know and that's what you're comfortable with. So if you have something so heavy on your back that your body's afraid it's going to get crushed, it's not going to all of a sudden allow you to do some brand new thing. It's going to revert back to what it knows. So if it's too heavy again, you'll end up going too slow. But likewise, if it's too light, if you try to go super fast, the bar's going to fly off your back, or it's just going to hurt your joints. So from like a huge extension, so kind of a shock. So it has to be heavy enough that you have to squat fast in order to do it well, but not so light that the bar will come off your back, or not so light that you're going to like get thrown forward. So it needs to be a decent amount of weight. So what we generally aim for is 50% of your 1 rep max. So if a person squats 400, because the math is going to be easy for me, they'll put 200 pounds on the bar, and then we're looking for a little bit of band tension and kind of equating to around 25%. That's a really weird number for you to try to figure out. But what it means is if I squat 400 and I have just the bar plus bands, it should feel like 100 pounds. It should feel like 25%. And then from there, I'm going to start to add the plate weight up to the 50%. So this is some guesstimations, but if you go with the idea of, okay, I squat X, so if I have the bar plus bands, it should feel like 25% of my X. So again, if I squat, say 300, it should roughly feel like whatever the heck 300 is divided by 4, so I should have picked a better option. So, but it should feel like that number, like that amount. So you want it to feel like 25% of the total. So that's kind of the concept. So how you'll know is if you put the bands on and all of a sudden it's like crazy hard, then it's too much bands. So the idea is to just get enough of a stimulus where you can feel the bands. And the reason why we put bands on is the resistance from the band is kind of like a more constant tension on the body. So if you don't move fast, if you have a moment of kind of where you just kind of push and then try to coast, the band will stop you or it'll throw you back down to the bottom. So with bands, it allows you to kind of be fast and be aggressive, but it allows that weight to kind of be more consistent, not fly off your back. So it's kind of a better feel and a better allowance of being fast. So the bottom thing we have there is positioning. So if you feel one of your weaknesses is as you go throughout the motion, you kind of go from a good position, bad position, good position, bad position. So what you can do is those slowed eccentric, concentrics, where you have that 5 count on the way down and a 5 count on the way back up. It forces you to spend more time in every single position, and that'll help you get physically stronger in each of those positions. So we talked about using that technique for in the hole or in the bottom of the squat. So the same thing applies if you're looking at a weakness in the top or a weakness in the middle. You just do that slowed eccentric, concentric, and that'll help you spend more time in those weak spots. So that's the idea of some physical ways to address weaknesses. So again, it's just kind of a short list and sticking to just variations of squatting. But this will kind of help you kind of analyze and start to change your training around to address your weaknesses, physical weaknesses. So the last thing we have here is kind of mental cues. So we have written down is if I'm weak in a squat, these will be kind of universal for all 3 lifts. But if I'm weak in a squat, I want to continue to practice and review. So it's not enough to just like do squat for squat for squat. You want to analyze how each squat was. So, and again, a really good way of doing that is filming yourself on your phone. So when I first started lifting, that wasn't an option. There was no cell phones. There was no video cameras on cell phones. So now that you have that availability and that technology, it's awesome, and it's very good to use that. So it's really immediate feedback. So again, you can't just squat, 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 squat. You have to squat correctly over and over and over. So the next thing we have here is cue cards. So I have had clients before, and they loved it. This really worked. Is they'll print out on a big 8x11 page paper. They'll print out some cues, like one-word cues, and they'll put that on the floor right in front of the squat rack. And then every time they squat, right before they're about to go into the bar, they kind of read down through the cues, and then they say them in their head as they're doing the lift. So it's just a constant reminder. Every single set, you're reminded of every cue you want to work on. So don't start with like 500 cues. Start with like maybe 2 or 3. Get those perfect, then add another one, then add another one. So you want to work on perfecting the cues, not just trying to do a million of them, getting half of them wrong. So the next thing we have here is to do extended warm-up sets. So say you're going to work up to 315 as like kind of your main lift. If you just normally do like say 135, 225, 275, then right at 315, that doesn't give you a lot of practice. So what we tend to do is I tend to promote people to take smaller jumps. So if a person's working at 315, they might start with just a bar, then 95 pounds, then 135, 185, 225, 275, then 315. So will you maybe have potential to getting a little bit worn out or a little bit weaker by the time you get to 315? Initially, yes. But as you keep doing that and you keep practicing that, your body will get used to that workload. So just kind of this is going to seem like kind of a sarcastic thing to say, but if doing a couple extra sets, like 3 or 4 extra sets of lifts before your big lift wears you out, then you're not in good enough shape. So you should be able to kind of get a couple warm-up sets in extra and not be really hurt at your main lifts. So it might not be a good idea on a day where you're doing a true 1 rep max. You might want to take more concise and fewer warm-ups to make sure you don't wear yourself out. But on most of your training, when you're trying to work on getting stronger rather than testing your strength, you want to take these extended warm-ups and give yourself more practice. So again, this is the video for squatting. So that's kind of the 3 points again is technique work. So these are the cues we go through. Physical lifts you can do to work on specific weaknesses, and then kind of the mental cues. So next in the video series will be the bench press. So if you have a question specific to squatting in this video, you can email us at brutalirongym@gmail.com. That's brutalirongym, all small letters, all one word, @gmail.com. Okay, thank you.